Morning again. First Parish of Watertown. It's so good to be with you today. I love getting to be a guest preacher, and I don't ever take that privilege for granted. So thank you for welcoming me and giving me the chance to meet your wonderful community. What does it mean to spiritually awaken? From the Buddha to St. Paul, from Emerson to Julian of Norwich, the history of faith shows us an abundance of awakenings, eruptions of enlightenment, new vision, new vitality, after which our spiritual world is never quite the same. And then we have the so-called Great Awakenings, 4 periods in American history where millions of people were swept up in a great wave of new spiritual energy. The Buddha awakened famously when he sat down beneath a sacred fig tree and felt such profound bliss that he was rooted to the spot for 49 days. Sounds nice, doesn't it? No email, no horrible news coming out every day. It sounds great. Saul of Tarsus, later known as St. Paul, was traveling the road to Damascus when he saw a flash of heavenly light and heard the voice of Jesus. Not long after, he converted, so spiritually opened by that experience that he dedicated his life to the faith he once reviled and persecuted. As for Emerson, well, when I read Emerson, I get the sense that the man would have 3 spiritual awakenings by lunchtime. Here's how he describes taking a walk. Crossing a bare common in snow puddles at twilight under a clouded sky, I have enjoyed a perfect exhilaration. I am glad to the brink of fear. Imagine being so happy to see a clouded sky that it almost scares you. I love that. I want that. Emerson thought that every moment we spend in nature is an opportunity for reverence, for our spirits to connect with the divine and be awakened. And then there's the English mystic Julian of Norwich, who in the 14th century was struck by a terrible illness and on the brink of death had a series of visions. What she took from her awakening was an intense conviction that God's love is everywhere and everlasting. It was actually very universalist, almost before the universalists. God is love, and that love extends to all of us. These are a few well-known awakenings, some of the greatest hits, if you will. But awakenings can come in all shapes and sizes. You could have a spiritual awakening from hearing your favorite music or from eating a sufficiently exceptional slice of pie. So awakenings can be big or small, individual or communal. We're all on a journey of trying to become a little more awake than we were the day before. And even a small awakening is an opening of the spirit, a chance to be transformed by welcoming some new insight or wisdom. And when I say awake, I mean it in the following senses. Awake to the beauty in our world, awake to the sacred, to love, to empathy for other living beings, awake to the unity and interdependence of all things, awake to the urgent causes of social justice, awake to our own strength and our ability to create change, as well as awake to our own smallness, awake to humility, awake to peace, awake to acceptance, awake to forgiveness of ourselves and to others. It's not a comprehensive list, but that's my nutshell version of spiritual awakeness. So let's dive a little deeper with today's reading. It's a scripture passage from Romans 13. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here. Here we see Paul writing to the Christian community in Rome. Let me give you just a little context. This was about the year 55 AD, and at the time, Christianity was still a plucky startup religion, before it was, shall we say, acquired and franchised by a series of Roman emperors. At the time Paul was writing this, professor of religion Bart Ehrman estimates there were at most 1,500 Christians in the world. It was small. Christianity was small, fragile, and facing a very real chance of being wiped out. We came very close to having no Unitarians and no Universalists. Not until the year 312 was Christianity even legal in the Roman Empire, and they faced extensive persecution, most famously by the tyrannical emperor Nero. Nero was equally notorious for his chain of overpriced cafes in the greater Boston area. Thank you. Thank you. But despite the darkness in the world around him, despite oppression from one of the largest empires the world has ever seen, Paul makes a prophecy. He says to his siblings in faith, let's wake up. The night is nearly over, and the day is closer than you think it is. Don't wait for some better time far in the future, some imagined, easier time when all the trouble has calmed down and things are happy and peaceful. The time for spiritual awakening, he says, is now. And it is through our awakening that a new dawn is made possible. First Parish, I'm also here this morning for the business of prophecy, a prophecy that, like Paul's, both predicts and calls for spiritual awakening. The great thing about prophecy, by the way, is it will take a very long time before any of you can conclusively say that I was wrong. And by the time of my debunking, I will have taken my big preaching paycheck and fled to Montreal. It's the perfect crime. I'm joking about that, but I'm serious about what I say next. America has had 4 great awakenings, periods of great spiritual passion, innovation, and social change. I think that within the next decade, we will see the beginning of a 5th, a resurgence of spiritual and religious energy drawn from 2 powerful sources. First, the yearning that people have for purpose, for community, for true connection to the sacred and to each other. And second, a great energy will come from backlash to the spiritual ills of our time, like the insatiable greed that is destroying the only planet we will ever have. This awakening will be distinct from those that came before. I believe it will be interfaith, that people of diverse spiritual beliefs and identities will gather, not around a single theological vision, but around shared spiritual values and a vision of a kinder and more equitable world, rather than a world of might makes right and big fish eat little fish. I believe this is the moment for progressive faith, for the religious left to raise our voice and make a case for a very different way of living than that which is dictated to us by a very small number of wealthy and powerful people. I've made my claim. Let me give you some of my reasoning. To predict a new awakening, we have to understand those prior. And I could talk about the Great Awakenings for ages, but I will give you the quick version. The first Great Awakening was before the American Revolution, 1720s and 30s. It was in part this revolt against religion becoming corporate, materialistic, lifeless. These were in Puritan churches, Congregational, Baptist, and it was in part about democratizing spirituality, making it more local, like our Unitarian-Universalist tradition, less controlled by authorities. There was also this intense emotional charge to it. People were weeping and rejoicing in their churches. The first Great Awakening also featured a lot of theology that is complete anathema to the beliefs we espouse, as you use. The first Great Awakening's central voice was probably Jonathan Edwards. This was a fire and brimstone kind of a preacher who probably has a very low approval rating in this room. He gave these sort of scary sermons about sin in society, and he made people worry about, if they were right with God, if they would be saved or damned. Of course, as Universalists, we are on a very different wavelength. So let me draw an important distinction that I see between the first Great Awakening and the fifth. If the central spiritual question 300 years ago for most people was, what shall I do to be saved? I think the question we're grappling with now is, what shall we do to be saved? For most people, I believe our great spiritual concern today is not individual salvation in the next life, but collective salvation and liberation in this one. The second Great Awakening, I think, is where American religion really gets cooking. This was about 1790 to 1840. It was a time of innovation, of energy and zeal of just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. You know, people were yearning to connect with their religion in new ways and, in fact, to remake society in the image of their faith. People were trying new things at a breakneck pace. Utopian societies, Mormonism, and the African Methodist Episcopal Church were all founded in this time. So, as you can tell, it had very conservative and very progressive elements. Our own William Ellery Channing spread the Unitarian gospel in this time, and causes like abolition and women's suffrage were deeply intertwined with the spiritual movements of the Second Great Awakening. Preachers would rail against the evils of slavery and corporate greed. There was a sense that faith was calling people en masse with divine urgency to fight for spiritual revolution. For the sake of time, I will be skipping the Third and Fourth Great Awakenings. Much like the Rocky movies, 3 and 4 are widely considered to be a step down. This is with no offense, of course, to Ivan Drago, the great Soviet boxer. Now that we've looked at the past, let me close by looking to the future. Based on precedent, I think there are three preconditions for a great awakening. The first is unmet spiritual hunger in large numbers of people. Second, a social, political, and cultural climate that provokes strong spiritual backlash. And third, the declining appeal of prior and existing spiritual frameworks, which sparks a desire for new ways of understanding and relating to the sacred. In this moment, I see all three of those conditions as fully met. And I think there is a great energy out there yet to be unleashed that has the potential to transform our society as did the Second Great Awakening. I don't know about you, but I think there is a great spiritual hunger in the world today, a yearning. I think a lot of people, for various reasons, feel quite lost and alone, perhaps bereft of purpose or hope. I'm not the first person to say I think in some ways we're in a period of spiritual crisis. To quote the philosopher Antonio Gramsci, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." Isn't that a great quote? I love that quote. I just wish it weren't so accurate. Politically, of course, we're in a frightening moment with a new government, the core values of which seem to be white supremacy, upward transfer of wealth, and dismantling anything that serves the public good. But if certain groups are going to double down on cruelty, then we will double down on love. And what could be at the heart of a fifth great awakening but love? A love that calls us to universal siblinghood, to protect our environment, to anti-racism, to finally put people before profit. I read some news last month that actually put a smile on my face for change, made me feel hopeful for change. I learned that the Unitarian-Universalist Association, along with several other religious groups, is filing a lawsuit against the Trump administration over a policy that would allow ICE to raid houses of worship. To me, that felt like a small preview of what a fifth great awakening could look like. People of diverse beliefs but shared spiritual values, guided by faith to fight hard for social change. Christians, Jews, Unitarian, Universalists, people of all beliefs, awakening together into a movement greater than any of us could make alone. And I believe UUs can be a vital part of that movement if we invest in our faith, invest in communities like this one, and build bridges to other communities of faith. Above all, let us think big and imagine boldly. So, like Paul, I've made my prophecy, and I confess in doing so that I am not a neutral party. I would like to see a spiritual awakening in my lifetime. I am also well aware that most prophecies do not come true. But we can also, if we unite the power of our voices, speak them into existence. Amen, Ashe, may it be so.